So thank you, Reggie and Patty, and actually the Historical Society in general for inviting me in here tonight to share this with you all. They say you can never go back, but in the next 45 minutes or so, I'd like to try and bring you back. Debbie and Jack Andrew were skiers back in the 1930s. As Reggie said, I'm Mark Andrew, and tonight I'd like to share with you how the Andrew family came to make Waterville our second home. Most of the photos I have are from our family albums. A few came from the internet, the Waterville Valley Historical Society collection, some Waterville brochures, and yes, I borrowed a couple from Grace Bean's book, The Town at the End of the Road. Debbie and Jack Andrew joined the Old Colony Ski Club with a lodge in New Hampton, New Hampshire in the late 1930s. The club had somewhere on the order of 100 members, mostly from the south of Boston. They skied at all the walk-up trails in the area, Frontenac and Wendy's in Plymouth, all the trails on Cardigan in Alexandria, the smaller hills around Bristol and New Hampton, Stinson Mountain in Rumney, and Mount Tecumseh and the Greeley Slopes in Waterville. Here is a picture of my mother, Debbie, skiing, and all it said was, in New Hampshire, in 1939 at age 20. On the right side of the picture, you can see the herringbone patterns in the snow, so this was obviously a walk-up trail. I don't have many pictures of my dad, as he was generally the photographer. On March 20th, 1938, and he kept detailed notes, he took this photo looking up the Tecumseh Trail, and if you'll notice the width, it was 10 to 15 feet wide at the widest point. At the same time, he took this photo. This was the ski cabin at the base of the Tecumseh Walk-Up Trail. From what I understand, it was left over from a logging operation, and they ended up leaving it there and reconfiguring it as a warming hut at the bottom of the trail. If you take a look at all the skis, I counted about 30 pair. Now this hut, this cabin, is a mile in from the Triple I Road, and then you had to climb the trail. So it gives you an idea of how many people were involved in skiing at that time. And here's another picture of the same hut from the top of the last steep pitch going down into the meadow. And with the advent of the rope tow, they then skied primarily at Cardigan Lodge, Frontenac, Mount Piro in Plymouth, Snows Mountain in Waterville, and occasionally took trips to the tramway on Cannon. I've got a couple of photos of people reaching the top of the rope tow on Snows Mountain. From what I understand, it was long, it was steep, it was a real bear to make it all the way up. But they did it. In the winter of 1947-48, Ralph Bean was working at the Waterville Inn and running the ski tow out back. The Old Colony Club members got to know him pretty well. Several members wanted to find a place where they could ski without having to drive every morning. When Ralph bought the inn in 1948, he agreed to lease them 5 bunk rooms over the kitchen, adjacent to the rooms that the BBTS had already agreed to lease. So these were the rooms here on the second floor, and they were on both sides of the hallway. And it went down a little further than what you can see in this picture. Basically, it was over the kitchen. So thus, the Vorlager Ski Club was formed in 1948 in our living room in Wellesley, Mass. And by the way, the word Vorlager is German, and it means to lean forward at the knees and ankles without lifting your heel. So a typical skiing position. Charter members of the Vorlager Club, in addition to my parents, were some names you might recognize. Howard and Dottie Grimes, Fred and Mary Jane Rust, Clarence Lund, Charlie and Eleanor Holmeyer, John and Priscilla Clifton, and many, many more. Members from both clubs worked together to remodel the bathrooms or shower rooms, and work weekends were held each fall to prep the area for ski season, where painting was done and repairs made to the bunks, whatever needed to be done. And here are some photos from a February 1949 ski trip to Waterville. Oops. Okay, my parents are right here. That's Clarence Lund. And unfortunately, I don't recognize any of the others in the picture, but those were all Vorlager members. And again, this is at the top of the rope tow. Again, my parents, Clarence, Charlie and Ella Holmeyer, and I don't recognize this man on the end. This was a typical bunk room setup, and it was very basic. You brought your sleeping bag, and there were unofficial ski club meetings from time to time in the bunk rooms, figuring out if they're going to ski at Waterville the next day or go somewhere else. So with 2 ski clubs renting space in the inn, and the Hockerberger Ski Club owning the Osceola Cottage, or the Little Red House, a Tucker Snowcat with a roller and trailer was purchased by the inn. And this is a copy of a newspaper article announcing the delivery of the Snowcat. That was used for trail maintenance, ski touring on the golf course, transportation to the meadow at the base of the Mount Tecumseh walk-up trail. Here are some early photos of the Snowcat. Out in front of the inn. And that's the large trailer. You can see how many people would fit in there with all their skis. This is a smaller trailer if they were just going for a tour around the golf course. This is the Snowcat at the meadow, and this, with the trailer behind it, this was as far as the Snowcat could make it. The trail was too narrow and too steep to pull a trailer up. And this is ski touring in front of the inn. Not sure you could get away with that now with several people on the same rope. And then, of course, getting ready for the 1952 election. In the 60s, the original Tucker was sold to Glidden Ski Tow, a family-run tow in Ashland, New Hampshire. And here's the same Snowcat, painted red, with the same roller that was used to maintain the trails at Waterville. When the Gliddens closed their hill in the late 1960s, the Cat was left in a large shed at the top. In the last few years, the land was sold, and Don Johnson of Thornton acquired it. When he bought it, this is what it looked like, parked in the woods. He left the exterior as found to save the patina on it and to save the wording, but it runs. He restored it mechanically, and this is a picture of it at the Ski Museum up at Cannon. So today it runs, and if you ever go to the snowmobile or antique snowmobile show, usually held in Thornton every February, he always has it there. I'd like to talk a little bit now about the Waterville Inn, shown here on a winter postcard from back in the 50s, maybe even before. Out of curiosity, how many people here remember the Waterville Inn? Anyone? Okay, well, I'd like to take a few minutes and share some of my recollections of it. Built in 1868, she was a typical New England inn with white clapboards, dark green shutters, and she sat in a very prominent position in the middle of the valley. She was the valley. The wraparound porch, she did look down the first fairway towards the Sandwich Range of mountains, and her biggest feature, her most important feature to me, was the wraparound porch. It started at the entrance to the crew dining room here, went across the west end of the main dining room, across the front of the inn, down the east side, all the way across the north side to the entrance to the ski room. So almost all the way around the inn. In the summertime, the porch would be filled with green wicker chairs, some with fixed backs, some rockers. Great place to spend an afternoon reading. The main part of the inn on the second and third floors had about 40 guest rooms, which would accommodate up to 100 depending on families, rollaway cots, etc. The second floor bunk rooms, of which I believe there were 10, could hold 6 per room or another 60. These are the rooms rented by the BBTS and the Vorlager. On the third floor, above those bunk rooms, were bunk rooms for the crew, the staff of the inn. And I think there were 8 rooms up there, plus some storage rooms. So it would be easy to say that in the wintertime, on a busy weekend, she would hold 150 guests. Ralph and Grace Bean owned the inn. They lived in the house across the street, which also held an office, and I think that's now part of the Waterville Academy. In the 50s and 60s, Wen Stevenson was the manager, and his wife Ellie ran the dining room and supervised the housekeepers. They lived in the annex, which was next to the Catherine Patton cottage at the end of Greeley Hill Road. I believe that building burned around 1985. Wen also taught at Holderness School and St. Mary's School in Franconia at various times. He was part of the Mount Washington Observatory crew that recorded the 231-mile-an-hour wind gust in 1934. On the first floor of the inn, and this is a very old picture, but it never really changed. On the first floor, as you entered through the front door, the lobby was to your right with a large stone fireplace. Eventually, the front desk was moved from here to about where the photographer is standing, and this became another part of the lobby. It's a group playing cards directly in front of the big stone fireplace. And in the winter, there was almost always a roaring fire going there. Here's a more modern picture. This was taken in 1965 for the 1966 summer brochure. And by the way, the phone lines into the valley were all party lines, including the phone at the front desk of the inn. You had to know which ring was yours. Calling another house in the valley that shared your line was kind of interesting. You would dial, get a busy signal, push down on the plunger, and then the phone would ring with their ring. When it stopped ringing, you knew they had picked up. You could release the plunger and you could talk. So anyway, off of the lobby was Grace's gift shop, right in here, and then the music room. And in the music room, square dances, movies, locally produced shows would happen. And it was probably about the same size as the lobby. It was pretty sizable. Going back to Grace's gift shop, I have a trivia question for you. There was a winter product that was sold there that called Waterville its home. It was also sold in the snack bar and the ski repair or rental shop. Anyone have any ideas of what that might have been? It was a product called Schusspuss. It was a lanolin-based cream for lips and face to prevent chapping, so you could go out skiing on a -20 January day and still have a face left at 4 o'clock. It came in a small tube, about the size of a toothpaste tube, and I believe it was created and marketed by Fred Rust of the Vorlagers and Harry Pollard of the BBTS. Okay, here is a picture on the other side of the lobby. This is a very old picture where the desk used to be. That was opened up into more lobby space. The front desk was here. That's the door to the library. And this is the stairs going up. At the head of the stairs on the second floor was a reading room. It was on the front of the hotel, and it had a terrific view down the golf course to the Sandwich Mountains ahead. Back to the first floor, the hallway to the left led to the dining room. But if you took an immediate right, it led to the ski room. As you entered the ski room, which had a storage area for skis overnight, as well as a workbench for working on your edges or doing some waxing for the next day, there was a wooden telephone booth as you entered that ski room, because There weren't any phones upstairs in any of the rooms. If you needed to make a phone call, you went in there, closed the door, and hope it was quiet enough, and you started feeding your dimes in. There were public restrooms behind the ski room, and if you continued through the ski room, you came to the lounge, also known as the elbow room. This was usually a hub of activity post-skiing and after dinner. And right in the middle of that picture is Ralph Bean holding court. And lots of people having a good time, enjoying themselves. You notice the furniture was a very clunky pine. I believe Walpole Furniture sells stuff like this. And it was comfortable, it was rugged, and it consisted of chairs, stools, tables. It was so comfortable and popular that in 1964, when the Vorlager Ski Club left to buy their own ski house over in Vermont, they created their own lounge, named it the Elbow Room, and furnished it with the same chairs. So it definitely made an impression on them. A key feature of the Elbow Room was music. Dick Jackson wore many hats at the inn. He kept the books for Ralph. He did have training in finance. He covered the front desk. He was in charge of the golf course. He was the golf pro. He was in charge of maintaining the one clay tennis court at the end of the inn. He held various town offices. But his favorite job, he played piano in the Elbow Room. He trained at the Berklee School of Music in Boston, and while there met many top jazz pianists. When he played in the Elbow Room, he was often joined by Clarence Lund on trombone, Ralph or Wen Stevenson on the washtub bass, and occasionally Walter Johansson would be there with his accordion. This was truly a happening place. Back to the dining room, which was sizable, with huge picture windows looking out on the golf course and mountains. Not only were all meals served here, it also held ski club meetings like this. It got pretty rowdy at times, I guess. Going through the dining room, you can see the doors straight to the back, was the kitchen. And for many years, Phoebe Downing of Campton was the cook. While not a chef per se, she put out lots of good meals to many hungry skiers. When called upon, she could put out quite the spread. This one from Washington's birthday in 1957. Yes, that's me at 5 years old with my mother, Debbie, with the stuffed pig on the table. Phoebe was a jovial lady. She loved to have visitors in her kitchen, except at mealtime, when things got a little bit crazy. At breakfast, she made sure that if there were kids eating at a certain table, she made pancakes with their faces cooked into it. Edith Johnston was the pastry chef, and she could turn out some incredible work. There were always fresh rolls, biscuits, breads, cakes, pies, and of course, donuts. Ed Dickinson from North Woodstock was the night watchman at the hotel for many, many years. I remember him as a loner, quiet, kind of gruff, probably just the person you wanted to walk the halls at night to make sure everything was under control. He carried a mechanical clock much like this, which has a replaceable paper disc in it. And on each floor in numerous locations were stations just like this. When he got to a station, he would push the key into the clock, it would make an imprint on the paper disc, and he would continue his rounds. In the morning, the manager would swap out the disc, rewind the clock for the next night, put a new disc in, and check it over to make sure Ed made his hourly rounds, stopping at each place all night long. And he did that for many years, and I remember those stations very clearly. Andrew family weekends at Waterville. Well, I wasn't around in 1948, but both my brothers, John and Bruce, or Bear, certainly were around. And they learned to ski pretty much as soon as they could walk. I mean, this is the Andrew family. We skied. That's what we did. In 1952, the rope tow was replaced with a T-bar lift and a novice rope tow installed on the outrun of the Beanbender Trail to the north of the inn. I'm not certain which year was my first in Waterville. Perhaps the winter of 53, 54, I'm not sure. But being an Andrew going to Waterville is just what you did. We were a skiing family. Here's an early photo of us 3 boys with my mother, Tecumseh in the background, very obvious, and Dad was the photographer. The inn was open in the winter, starting December 26th for Christmas week, also February vacation week, and weekends until mid-April. The Vorlagers were extremely active, and Waterville was the base. Here's what it looked like for us. Our weekend began on Wednesday, when club members would call our home in Wellesley to let Debbie know who was going to be coming up that weekend. Thursday evening, from Christmas to Easter, Debbie would call the inn with a list of who was coming, what room they were going to be in, and that way the inn could plan meals and staffing. Friday afternoon, we'd pile into the station wagon, make the 4-hour drive to the valley. Interstate 93 was still just barely a dream. It was Route 128 to Route 3 through Chelmsford and Tyngsboro, Mass, on to Nashua, New Hampshire. When we got to Concord, what is now exit 14 interchange with Loudon Road was a huge rotary. Just to the right and above it in the picture is the Concord Highway Hotel. It looks quite different today. From there, it was north to Route 3A through Boscawen, Franklin, Bristol, past Newfound Lake to West Plymouth. From Plymouth, it was Route 3 to West Campton, and then pretty much back roads to Waterville. As I-93 moved northward, our route adjusted, with the highway reaching Plymouth in 1965. Sometimes dinner would be in Concord at the Howard Johnson's, which is now the Common Man in Concord, same location. In later years, when the trip was only 3 hours, we could actually make it to Plymouth for dinner and eat at the Village Steakhouse, which was located on Main Street underneath Anderson's Bakery, which has changed hands several times in the last few years. We would arrive late in the valley, hit our bunk room, and crash while the adults checked out the elbow room. Saturday morning meant up early, eat a full breakfast, out on the slope by 9 when the lift started. Back in the 50s, lift tickets were $3 or $3.50 for a full day of skiing. I started out on the rope tow, which was a 400-foot tow run by Leroy Sawyer of Thornton. He had unbelievable patience for those of us just learning to ski. Leroy's Loop in the Lower Meadows lift area is named in his honor. It didn't take long for me to outgrow the rope tow and master the T-bar, better known as the A slope, where the rope tow was the B slope. Original names. At the T-bar, and here's a couple of older pictures, this one taken right after the T-bar was put in. They haven't even painted the building yet. At the T-bar, Carl Broad was always loading you on, and Elliot Tiny Hearts was at the top. He was called Tiny because he wasn't. He was tall, large, great guy, nice, loved everybody. And this, again, this is a picture of the beginning of the T-bar where you got on. The snack bar, and this is a picture before the snack bar was enlarged and the door put on the far end of the building. The snack bar of those days was run by Edie Morrison and Mona Griffin. It was a place to go to warm up and to have lunch. They always made sure that us kids, if we were cold, we got a hot chocolate. If we didn't have any money, somehow they found some change, but they took care of us. Mom usually packed our lunch for Saturday in a big cooler, and we bought hot dogs and burgers on Sunday. When your 2 older brothers eat 3 sandwiches apiece, you bring food. Here's another detail. The lift and ski shop crew brought their own dinner pails. Around 10, they would eat lunch on the go, and lunch consisted of a sandwich and coffee. At noon, all the lifts shut down, and they had dinner. More sandwiches, dessert, coffee, and then at 12:30, everything started up again. Try doing that today. I don't think it would work. We also skied the elbow bender and bean bender. Oh, here's some ads for the inn. Rates were quite reasonable. Okay, this will show you, okay, on the 1994 Google Earth picture, you can see more clearly. This was the upper T-bar and the upper trail. On the outside was the bean bender ending at the rope toe slope. Closer to the lift line was the elbow bender. And then this was the A slope. Even that wasn't too wide. If you look at the 2011 photo, you can see Cascade Ridge Road goes up where the rope toe was, crosses over the bean bender, and I believe now this section is pretty much gone. The elbow bender shows here and there, but you can see where the National Forest boundary is. It's pretty obvious here in these pictures. And the trails, the elbow bender and the bean bender, they too were only 10 or 15 feet wide. So you had to turn when the trail turned, but it did make for easy grooming. One pass up and one pass down and the trail was done. And in 1952, overnight rates at the inn were $12 to $15 per person, but that included 3 meals. On Saturday afternoons, after the lifts shut down around 4, Grace Bean would serve tea in the lobby near the stairway. Probably no food, just tea from a silver tea service. Even us kids were encouraged to have a cup. After that, it was time to get changed and ready for dinner. We kids would eat early. The adults would adjourn to the elbow room. Well, that's just another trail picture and information on the inn. I often found myself in the elbow room because they had cheese. Ralph always made sure that there was a big hunk of Swiss or cheddar or a stinky blue. I loved them all. It was great. So while there were 2 different ski clubs, there was no competition. Everybody hung out in the elbow room together. Everybody ate together. It was a lot of camaraderie going on. Basically, we're from 2 different geographical areas in Massachusetts. After dinner, there was a square dance in the music room. Frank Morrison from somewhere near Tilton was the caller. I remember him as being quite short and hefty, but he was another person that was fantastic with kids. He taught us all the moves. Kids session started around 7:30, and we were ushered out at 9 when the adults took over. Another side note here, there was one weekend in late January or early February every year that the Monsanto company in Montreal would come down and basically take over the hotel. They would bring a couple of busloads of skiers to Waterville for the weekend. Saturday night was their party night. After the square dance, they took over the music room for more dancing and their parties. Lots of drinking games, rowdy stuff. We kids were told in no uncertain terms, stay clear. Sunday was another early out the door to get in as much skiing as we could before we had to go home. Lift lines were non-existent until 1963 and after. By 1965, on a good ski day, cars would be parking nearly down to Bull Hill. And of course, there was no shuttle. You had to walk all the way up to the lift. Sometimes it would, the T-bar would lift me right off the ground sometimes, by the way, speaking of ski lifts. It would lift me off the ground, sometimes turn around backwards. It was interesting. As I got older and a little heavier, it wouldn't do that. At the end of the day, we'd have to wait for the snowcat to drag the lift line, smoothing it out for the next weekend. They would lock the roller, come down the lift line, and there would be 4 or 5 people pulling the heavy metal tees out of the way so that all the tracks from the weekend could be smoothed out. And of course, my brothers would help with that, so we'd have to wait. Sunday night was another long ride home, and we would stop in Nashua at the Green Ridge Turkey Farm for supper. Once the trip got down to 3 hours, then we would just go straight through. So these were our early Waterville weekends. While we kids were skiing, Jack was on ski patrol, Debbie skied during the day and worked the elbow room and the front desk in the evenings. Now going back to the inn ski area, shortly after purchasing the inn and about 500 acres of land at age 28, Ralph brought on Ray Brox of Drake at Mass, who had experience with a small ski area there. Along with Clarence Lund, Harry Pollard, and Fred Rust, they formed the Waterville Lift Corporation. By the way, Harry Pollard was instrumental in getting the ski patrol going in Waterville. He later went on to become the director of the National Ski Patrol, creating standards where the National Ski Patrol was accepted at every major ski area in the United States. And he started out at Snows Mountain in Waterville. Through the years, there were always surprises. One year we arrived on December 26th to find that the snack bar had doubled in size. Another time we arrived to find the elbow room enlarged with a small stage for the musicians. There were always changes, always improvements being made. And you never got an advance notice of it. You just showed up and, wow, look what they did. And over the years, the Vorlaga Club grew, and many of the members built homes here in the valley. The Grimes, Clarence Lund, Nancy Elliott, the Christophers, Cahills, Sedgwicks, Rusts, and I'm sure there are others. Summer vacations. Starting around 1954, 55, 56, again, I'm not sure of the year, we started coming up in the summer. The inn would open in June and stay open straight through Columbus Day, when it would close down until ski season. Ellie Stevenson wanted to find someone to run the dining room, and Debbie was called upon for summer duty. My oldest brother, John, worked as a busboy, probably until 1960. Bruce had already been following Ralph and went around helping with maintenance as needed, and he ended up working in the kitchen and golf course wherever help was needed. I was too young to work, so I just went to the swimming pool, learned about golf, played croquet, or rode my bike. On weekends, my father, Jack, would come up, and I'd often go fishing or play golf with him. He always managed to catch his limit, whether he was fished in the Mad River or up at East Pond, where he would occasionally go with Clarence Lund and Stan Brox, Ray's brother. Here is an aerial view. Let's see if I can point out some features here. Okay, we have the 9th green here, single tennis court, first tee, putting green, croquet court. Shuffleboard was up under the trees. Let's see, and the cottages were, in the 60s, the Hunt Cottage, the Norton Cottage, and the Bertolf Cottage. And those, there were others too, but these were the main ones. And then here is the swimming pool. It was cold. It was spring-fed. Heater? No, no way. And then here is the original tennis court, the original clay court at the east end of the inn. And you can see how the porch wrapped around the inn. In the beginning, we would stay at the inn. Once John hit college age, he worked out on the New Hampshire seacoast, where his college friends were, and the money was better. Bruce lived in the inn, and at some point, I moved in with the Beans. My job, so-called, was to do stuff with their boys, Dan and Dave, and try and keep us all out of trouble. I pretty much did that. Playing around the tower with a huge pile of boulders was always great fun. This picture shows, from about 1900, shows the rock pile about halfway up the tower. And that's the way it was in the 50s and 60s. It was great fun scampering around, and it was in a semicircular pattern, so it had some shape to it. And then this is a more recent picture. They took all the fun away, but I understand it was a liability and some of the rocks had fallen. So that was probably about 15 or 20 years ago that happened. We would also ride bikes, walk the river path, hike to the boulder, generally just keeping busy. One of the things I really enjoyed were the activities that Ralph Bean would take us on, and not just myself and his own kids, but basically any kids that were around in the valley were welcome. Whether it was hiking Osceola or Tecumseh or to the Cascades or Fletcher's Cascades, swimming at Flat Rocks, camping at the lean-to in the back of Packard's Field, probably on the edge of where the town square is now. also riding in his 1936 Ford convertible, boat rides on Squam in the African Queen, which was his old open boat, inboard motor, slow speed, canopy on top with a fringe, and every week he had something planned. And of course, October 12th, Ralph would pile all his kids in the station wagon, and we go to the Sandwich Fair. And back then, the Sandwich Fair was a one-day event. Meanwhile, at the inn, summer was the slow season. The winter guests were used to climbing up and skiing down all weekend long, so they had lots of energy that would carry over to the bar, the square dancing, you name it. Summer was slower, laid back, fewer guests, and the activities were hiking, golf, tennis, croquet, shuffleboard, swimming, etc. The elbow room and dining room were busy, as many of the cottage owners and their guests would come for dinner. Some of the cottage owners actually had their table in the dining room, permanently reserved. With things a bit slower, I also hung around the kitchen a little bit more. Phoebe the cook even made me a yellow oilcloth apron. I think it was bright yellow so she could keep an eye on me. Edie Johnston, the pastry cook, let me help making the donuts in the morning. My pay was a brown bag full of donut holes. And by the way, her secret to make the best dinner rolls was to brush them with pure New Hampshire maple syrup as soon as they came out of the oven. Very good. Some summer residents that were important to me were Hans and Margaret Ray, the creators of Curious George. Their summer place was on the second fairway, just down from the Grimes house. Margaret had wonderful gardens out front, but you'd best keep your golf ball out of them. Hans had a studio out back. He would come up to the pool and give turtle rides underwater to the little kids. He also had a solar cigarette lighter that a lucky kid would get to help with. Once a summer, Hans would do a chalk talk for the kids, and the finished sketches would be given away. In 1961, I missed it because I was sick with the measles. A few days later, he invited me to his studio, drew a picture of Cecily G. with measles, and that was for me. I still have it. It's framed in my office. But that's just the way he was. They never had kids, but he loved kids just the same. He also was an astronomer, wrote some astronomy books, and would often bring his telescope out onto the second fairway, and he would invite everybody to come down, whether it was looking at constellations, the rings of Saturn. He would talk all about it. Everyone had a chance to look through the telescope. It was amazing. Looking back at some other important events, in the summer of '59, the upper T-bar was installed. I recall that when the Brock's Company dump trucks arrived with the towers, one of the loads had shifted, so every time he hit a bump, the front wheels came off the ground. These trucks were pulled up snows via Greeley Hill Road by a large bulldozer, front wheels off the ground the entire way up. I'm sure it was OSHA approved. Also in 1959, Ralph had a billboard erected in West Campton near the Red Schoolhouse restaurant at the intersection of Route 3 North and the Ellsworth Hill Road. Ski Waterville Valley is what it said in the winter with large letters with T-bar, rope tow, ski school. In the summer, it was changed to See Waterville Valley with swimming pool, hiking, golf course, etc. I believe that sign remained until early '66 when I-93 made it to Campton and there were fewer travelers coming up Route 3. In the 50s, Waterville was really small, 11 residents in 1950 and 14 in 1960. Jackie Osborne was Ralph's secretary, and she was one of those serving as selectman for a few years. She married my uncle, my mother's brother, in 1960, and they moved out of the valley. In the fall of '59, heavy rains caused severe flooding, much like Tropical Storm Irene a few years ago, damaging all area roads and destroying the original Waterville campground, which was down by Flat Rocks. In the spring and summer of 1960, the entrance to the III Road was changed to its present location, and the campground took over where the III Road used to be. In those days in Waterville, there were no food service companies delivering product. Thus, the town trip was a Monday through Friday necessity in the summer. Although this isn't the bus that Waterville had, this is very much like the one that was used. For many years, they had one like this. They had different models as they wore out, needed replacement. Ralph always tried to find a responsible employee to do the town trip. Floyd Wilkie, the freestyle skier, did that for a few years. Chip Kajula and my brother Bruce also drove it from time to time. About every 2 or 3 weeks, I'd ride along, although not when my brother was driving it. Who wants to hang around with their older brother, right? So the stops would be at Una's in West Campton to drop off or pick up laundry for long-term hotel guests, the bank for deposits and picking up change, Circle Tri dry cleaners for guests' needs, as well as the inn's napkins, tablecloths, sheets, and towels, Clay's newsstand for papers, Rand's Hardware for maintenance supplies, Adams Market for groceries, Volpe's for fruit and produce, Farley's drugstore, Samaha's store for cigarettes and candy for resale, Hatch Dairy for milk and cream, that's where Hannaford's is now, Campton Post Office for the mail, and Valancourt's in Campton for fresh eggs. So it was a full day. A lot of stuff, a lot of supplies needed to be picked up. In the winter, back then, the inn maintenance person did the plowing, but it was minimal and a small Jeep did the job. It also served in the summer to pull the gang mowers on the golf course. A cab over pickup was tried, but it just didn't work. It was too ungainly and just didn't do the job. The state plowed the Valley Road right up to the inn, and then they would plow down West Branch Road so they could turn around at Barnes End. Edgel's Garage in West Campton always won the bid on that. The roads plowed were just what is now Boulder Path beyond West Branch Road. West Branch Road was not plowed past the bridge over the Mad River. To the left of that bridge was the dump and the sewage lagoons. In North Waterville, Gaiety Gulch Road wasn't there until 1962, and Greeley Hill Road was strictly summer. And that was it. So it was minimal plowing. In early 1966, 5 new clay tennis courts were added between the existing court and the swimming pool. At this time, let me just point out a few things here. Okay, this time, first tee was here, and then you cross the road, the second, third, through the woods to the fourth. The fifth green was on top of Bull Hill, and most of the time it took 2 or 3 tries to get it up the hill onto the green. And then 6, 7, 8, and 9. And like I said, at this time, the first tee was right in front of the inn, and that was the view. And you can see the annex sticking out there right over the golfer's head. In 1966, as Tom Corcoran was taking over the inn, there were changes. Debbie now had a full-time job, working the front desk, dining room, filling in anywhere else. In the summer of '66, my parents separated, and Debbie, Bruce, and I became full-time Watervillians. We stayed at a cottage owned by Nat Orr on the second fairway, just a little bit down from the Ray's house. It had just been winterized and a furnace put in, and we started renting it that summer. It was a tiny 2-bedroom cottage with 1 bath and a tiny kitchenette that looked something like this. 2 burners, tiny sink, refrigerator, all in one. I think the whole thing was 24 inches wide. It was minimal, but it worked. It did have a very nice screened-in porch. It took over about 2/3 of the front, and there was a stone heatilator fireplace in it. So it was really nice on the inside. I began my sophomore year at Plymouth High School with the state of New Hampshire providing my transportation. I was the student from Waterville. Junior Boyce drove incredibly slowly. He would pick me up at 6:30 in the morning to make the 7 o'clock bus at Campton Cupboard. I would get home about 4:30 every day, and this was before the Valley Road was improved. The Valley had many distractions, and that year was definitely not my best academically. Throughout the fall, I worked every weekend on Mount Tecumseh in the first parking lot, assembling chairs for the new chairlifts. We had an ever-changing team, but man, did that wind howl through there. It was cold. That winter I worked odd jobs and skied when I could. Evenings and weekends I worked at the Snows Mountain Snack Bar. Another trivia question. What was that snack bar called after the lifts closed? Anyone have any idea?
The finish line is what I remember.
The finish line was after that. At the first year or first couple of years, it was called the Afterthought. And there was a jukebox that served burgers and steak, very basic. There might have been some beer served there, courtesy of Bert and Jerry Packard, who ran this food service operation up on the mountain. February 23rd, 1967 changed my life and the valley forever. It dawned snowy. As a matter of fact, we got about 18 inches of snow that day. And the state trucks broke down, of course. I was working in the Afterthought, but we closed early due to the storm. On the way out, the kitchen and dining room help were gathered on the porch. "They're burning our supper again," was the cry. We stuck around to see what was going on. From the side parking lot, it was really obvious. The grease fire was totally out of control. You could see orange between the clapboards all the way up from the exhaust fan to the eaves. Debbie was working the front desk. I checked in with her so she would know my whereabouts, because it was pretty obvious something major was happening. After she called the Campton and Plymouth fire departments, Plymouth called back. "It's snowing pretty bad out. Do you really need us?" Well, yes. That was the night the inn burnt down. So in 3 hours, the inn went from this to this. The snack bar portion was saved. Drifts that night were hip deep. Most of us ended up going to the new base lodge on Tecumseh where we were taken care of. And I remember warming up by sitting on the hearth of those huge fireplaces. You know, they have those huge corner pieces going up. I would sit with my back against one and my feet spread out. It was a long night. Todd Baldwin often recalled, and I'll quote, "There was a gentleman who called to ask about his upcoming reservation at the inn and inquire regarding the snow conditions at the mountain. He was talking with the lady that was running the inn desk, and she said to him that she had to apologize to him for cutting the conversation short as there was an emergency at the inn. The gentleman, after hearing about the tragedy at the inn, wrote Tom Corcoran a letter informing him that his conversation with the lady at the inn that night, which was the last communication with a customer at the inn ever, was most inspiring as to her professionalism, courtesy, and calm as the inn was burning. The gentleman that called was John Glenn, former astronaut, former senator, and the lady he was talking to was Debbie Andrew, my mother." So I have some pictures of the fire and the scene the next day from some photos that were given to my mother. Everyone got out, all 150 guests plus the crew. There were no injuries. It was amazing. This picture here shows the snack bar building, which was saved because of the direction of the wind. That building still exists. That's part of the Waterville Valley Academy. You can see how deep the drifts are on the cars. And at this time, just the kitchen L was fully involved. That's just a view through the trees from the front. And then the next day, from up on the hill behind the inn, and you can see the snack bar building right here. And out towards the road with the A slope in the background. And with the lift building behind it. Oh, I'll get to that in just a second. One more trivia question. Does anyone remember Snoopy? Okay. When the inn burned, or after the inn burnt, there had to be a way to access the telephone lines and water lines that had come into the inn and then dispersed to all the various cottages throughout the valley. So they built basically a doghouse with a cellar, because all the lines came in one place. And it really did look like a doghouse, and somebody put Snoopy on the top. Okay, as I mentioned, my life changed forever. With no other lodging in the valley, Debbie's full-time job was gone. We did stay through the summer of '67, moving to the Scrimshaw Cottage, which I believe was an A-frame, on Tower Lane at the site of the old bowling alley. That summer, the ski patrol hut was moved out near the first tee, where it served as post office, information center, and pro shop. In September of '67, the first roads were cut for the new lodge's Four Ways Restaurant, and Corcoran's Pond was cut out. This is Packard Road, that's Tecumseh Road, and that's Corcoran's Pond. I guess you could call it an early view of town center. It sat like this from 1967 to 1979, when it was finally completed and filled with water. And there are a number of stories to go along with that I won't get into. You've probably heard Tom Gross talking about them. So in October of '67, Debbie and I moved to Plymouth. Bruce stayed on with various job offers. My school results were quite different that year, as I made honor roll the last 3 semesters. I did work at the Mountain the winters of '67, '68, '68, '69 as a ticket stapler with John Hughes and Bob Skinner. And I'm sure you're aware my brother Bruce stayed on in Waterville working at Tecumseh Inn, Windsor Hill, and was fire chief for many, many years. After 2 years at Northeastern and 3 years in the Army, working at Rand's Hardware and running my own store in Rumney, I came back to Waterville in '83 to work snowmaking for a year for Mike Heath. My wife Linda worked many years at Village Condos. Our daughter Melissa worked at the Black Bear for several years, and our son Jerry worked snowmaking for a few winters. In spite of the many changes in the valley over the years, I still enjoy coming back, walking to the Cascades, climbing Osceola, reliving some of my times here, and just looking at how things have changed. So I hope that sharing some of my experiences has helped you understand what Waterville used to be and what the valley meant to the Andrew family. I have a few additional pictures that I'd like to show. This one here was when they tried to rename the trails to be constellations. The map was drawn by Hans Ray. I'm not sure if he came up with the names or not, but the names didn't really stick. Here are some things that I have reminiscent of the valley: a Waterville Lift Corporation patch, a pin, the Waterville Inn matchbook. The elbow room one, that is a swizzle stick fork, and we used to heat it in the middle and fold it and make a tie clasp out of it. And that's a close-up of the Waterville pin. And as a kid, I was always intrigued as to how the skis made the WV. That was just kind of neat. And then there's a patch. And I have a single ride ticket. I don't think it'll work, but back then you could buy 5 rides for $1. And this is an artist rendition of the inn. And that's where we're going to end it. If anyone has any questions or comments or whatever, try and answer them. But thank you for your attention.
Ski club, the bend your knee, bend your ankle ski club guy.
The Vorlager.
You mentioned early on, and I wanted to ask a question, that they moved to the Red House. What was the Red House?
Okay, the Red House was where the Hockerberger Ski Club was. Okay, they actually rented that house bought the house in 1941 before Ralph Bean came to Waterville. And they sold it in 1960, and Ralph bought it. One of the bits of information I don't know if you're aware of, but when Ralph bought the inn and 500 acres of land, he had a right of first refusal on all the privately owned properties in the valley at that time. So there was no zoning, there were no controls, but by having the right of first refusal, he could kind of screen who was trying to come in.
Is that house currently the Wyman house?
Yes. Yeah, it was purchased in 1961 by the Sossman, Wyman, and Burns families. And I'll throw out another little piece of interesting history. Dr. Sossman Leland Sossman, Sauce, whatever, he ran the races on Tecumseh. He ran the Widener Memorial Race. He had the permit from the Forest Service to cut and maintain trails on Tecumseh. When Tom Corcoran bought the valley, he had to negotiate with Ralph Bean on the inn and the property. He had to negotiate with the Waterville Lift Corporation for the slopes and the lifts and equipment. And he had to negotiate with Sauce to get the ability to cut and maintain trails.